It was a dark era in ancient Greece, several thousand years ago, where gods clashed with titans and mortals bent to their will.
Ares! Destroy my enemies, and my life is yours.
It was also a time when a ruthless and skilled Spartan captain rose to power by spreading terror and brutality throughout the villages of Athens.
Burn this village! Burn it to the ground!
With his lust for victory, and through a devilish pact with the god of war Ares, he found himself seeking vengeance against the very gods who have given him his unyielding power.
Ares! Athena! You conspire against me! You will pay for this, Zeus. Be certain of that.
Thus was born the story of Kratos, conceived not in the ancient chronicles of Greek mythology, but in 2004 in a revolutionary game development studio in California. With director David Jaffe at the helm, the team at Santa Monica Studios created what some have deemed one of the greatest games ever made.
It's a great game to allow you just to pick up and unleash your dark side and just go nuts.
Released in 2005, God of War sold millions of copies and garnered numerous awards and heaps of critical acclaim. A legend was spawned, whose story was carried across several epic sequels that have met similar sprawling success. With each installment in the God of War franchise, a new director was summoned to continue the story of Kratos, creating a fresh experience for a well-known and established character. Join us as we meet the unique minds behind the legend and learn how each director developed their respective games and contributed to the mythology of God of War.
Welcome, everyone. We have some Kratos fanboys here, I assume? Nice. God of War revolutionized the gaming industry with its epic storytelling, jaw-dropping action sequences, and a compelling cast of gods and goddesses, not to mention a quick and brutal lesson on Greek mythology. It is something I consider to be one of the most eye-catching and platform-defining franchises out there, and has set the standard for every action game that has tried to follow. Today, we will discover the vision behind the vengeance as we meet the directors of each of the God of War installments. First up, his visionary eye has brought us the destructively satisfying Twisted Metal series, which holds the record for being the longest-running PlayStation exclusive franchise. But that wasn't enough for this ambitious alum from USC. He went on to direct the very first God of War, thus introducing us to the world's ultimate badass. Please welcome David Jaffe. Next, as animation director of the first God of War, his talented team brought Kratos to life in groundbreaking graphical glory. On God of War 2, he expanded the story of Kratos, deepening the saga and turning it into a legend. Please welcome Cory Barlog. You good there?
I'm all right. Everything's good.
With over 11 years of experience in the entertainment industry, our next director has co-founded Ready at Dawn Studios, which has given us amazing PSP classics such as Daxter and 2 God of War games. For the first time in 2008, God of War went mobile, and gamers were finally able to bring the epic story of Kratos wherever they went. Please welcome the director of God of War Chains of Olympus, Rue Virasoria.
Right on, dude.
As lead environment artist for the first God of War, our next guest helped establish the world that Kratos would inhabit. He stepped up to become the director of one of the greatest and most legendary games ever created for the PlayStation 3. Please welcome Stig Asmussen. And finally, this director began his God of War career with Ready at Dawn Studios, where he was lead level designer for God of War Chains of Olympus. This year, he is tasked with leading the entire team and helming one of the most anticipated games for the PSP. Please welcome Dana Jan. Ladies and gentlemen, the creative directors of the God of War franchise. Okay, so guys, I have to ask, how are you feeling about this? I mean, this evening is all about you guys and these amazing games that you've created. You feeling good?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's tons of excitement coming from your side of the stage.
Can I just say thank you to all you guys for coming out? This is it is a big Thank you very much. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So I'm feeling thrilled and honored and grateful.
Yeah. You guys all had a Red Bull before this show. Come on.
Yeah, actually, I got one right here. We still have the Muranos.
Actually, I want to add too. I think it's. I mean, you guys are pretty much a testament to all the work that we do. I mean, the reason why we're here and the reason why we're doing this right now is because of the fans, and you guys make our job worth it. You know, it's fun making great games, but we do it for you guys as much as we do it for ourselves.
Okay, so we should probably break it down brass tacks at the beginning. What exactly does a game director do?
This is an excellent question. We talked about this earlier, but I mean, from my perspective, I mean, a game director actually is kind of like, you know, a captain on a ship. They're basically there to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing and steering the thing in the right direction. And so, from my perspective, you're actually, you know, involved in a little bit of everything. But at the same time, I think that you had an interesting perspective on that too, and so did David, about actually doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is like, maybe you do everything, but really you kind of do nothing. And I know Dave doesn't agree with that, but what I mean when I say that is like, when you become a director, you're not rolling up your sleeves and getting down and dirty like the rest of the team members do, and the sweat that they put in is actually propping your ideas. So I think a real general way you can look at it is the game director kind of is this guy that's got this vision, and very early on, he's got to be able to play the game, he or she has to be able to play the game from beginning to end in their head, very early on.
Well, I mean, see
see the game. And they have to illustrate. They have to be able to illustrate that to the rest of the team.
You're right. I mean, everybody. I don't know your background, but I mean, you can animate, you can draw,
Not anymore.
I can what?
Not anymore.
But I mean, so yeah. I mean, obviously, the guys who are also in the trenches who then move into a director role, I imagine would have a different perspective on it. But my perspective, though, is it's when you talk about sort of the vision of the game, especially on the first God of War, when nobody, with the exception of a couple of us, had any idea what it was. Every single day, you are sort of having to deal with the fact that you've got a very talented, incredibly educated, brilliant team that's going, does this guy know what he's doing? And you have to figure out a way to convince them by hook or by crook that you actually do have a vision in your head. And so when you say, well, the director doesn't do anything, I'll tell you what, I mean, it is a great job, and I'm hopeful that Sony allows me to continue to do it for them as long as they appreciate what I can do. But it is a hard job. And you guys managed, I don't know about you guys, but you two guys managed to do the job and still be really well liked on the team. You know.
Well, I think you bring up something really interesting about that, though, is that idea of having, you know, the vision of the game in your head and having to actually command a team of people to trust that what you're telling them to do or not to do is the right thing, when whether or not they can see it. And you know, they may have their own idea how something should go, but maybe it doesn't fit into this gigantic puzzle that you know ultimately how it should turn out. Or hopefully you do, and hopefully you take the right criticism and the right, you know, kind of
But let's
questions.
be honest, a lot of the time we have no clue what we're talking about. I mean, there are a lot of leaps that you make in this job where you're like, all right, look, I kind of know what I want, but sometimes you're discovering as you go.
Yeah, and the thing is that's the hard part. If you don't believe it yourself, or if you don't know it yourself yet, it's making people believe in the idea. That's, I think, one of the hardest things.
Otherwise known
Becoming
as lying.
Yeah, well, that too, but becoming the cheerleader, right?
But
yeah.
the nugget-
Even when the morale is down, you got to make people believe that this is the right thing to do. And that's one of the biggest jobs, actually, as a game director, is always making people believe that this is good, regardless of how bad things feel.
I have to respond to that, though, because seriously, as you're right when you're talking about specifics. If it's like, how do the Icarus wings work? I don't know. You know,
yeah.
But the
Not on the
nugget,
general.
the core heart and soul of that game, I do think you have to know it from the minute you walk in, and that's what you have to protect the whole process through.
So how did you guys become game directors? Because I don't think until recently you could actually go to college to be a game director. What path led you to this career?
There is no, and I guess,
There is no
except for
path.
no, even for you as well. It's
For
just
me, it
sort
was
of a
just that Corey
happenstance
quit.
thing. Yeah, I quit, so he quit, so I got it. So really, all you got to do is find somebody to quit.
Well,
Just quit.
You were saying
Right,
you started
exactly.
in animation and you guys started in drawing. Is that
Yeah.
is that eventually what led to it?
No, there was no direct path on that. Me doing animation and me ending up in directing was really, I guess the only reason I got it because everybody who was good turned it down.
No. Corey and I had a lot of discussions about the storytelling in Max Payne 2. And we were very much about how do we tell stories via interactivity and not through cutscenes. And the minute we started having those conversations, it was like, okay, he gets it. And so it wasn't that everybody else turned us down. It was just
But it
that-
was.
It wasn't. It was the fact that those conversations kind of happened after everybody turned us down. If they would have happened earlier, you know.
All right.
I
can
think
see
sometimes you just fall into it. I actually wasn't expecting to direct. It just so happened that the person who was leading the project right there didn't fit in the mix. I believe that the game should be something different than what it was, shaping up to be, and basically said, you know what, I'm going to take the reins. And it's not so much that somebody tells you you're going to be that; it's that you become the person that the team needs. And I think that for all of us, I think it kind of is that, right?
For me, it was actually kind of the opposite. I mean, after Corey left, the team is kind of deliberating and trying to decide like who was going to do it next. And I actually went into my boss's office and I named 2 people, and I wasn't one of the names. And he said, "What about you?" I'm like, "No, I gave you the 2 people I thought it should be." And then he brought me back about a week later, and he's like, "You're going to have to do it." And the thing is, the thing that really sold me is the team is really behind it. He had done conducted a lot of internal interviews and everything, and that meant so much to me. And to be honest with you, it was a challenge. And at the time, I questioned it a little bit, and now I don't question it at all. It was the greatest decision I ever made. I love it.
And you know what, just to finish on that idea, when I was doing Chains of Olympus, it almost was a natural transition for Dana to do what he did. I actually asked him before we finished Chains of Olympus, as much as, it would have been cool to do a second one, I asked him one day, hey, do you want to direct the second one?
You just said you didn't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Kind of like along those lines.
Pass the buck.
Yeah.
It appears to usually happen in the most weird places.
Yeah. Sort
of
Like,
way,
hey, it's in
yeah.
the kitchen and you're having a bagel. And someone's
exactly.
like, hey, you want to direct the next game? Yeah, sure, all right.
But I mean, if I
Over
can
drinks,
just-
usually.
If I can kind of speak to the other end, because to me it's a coveted position. It is a position that I fought for. That frankly, when I started at Sony, there weren't even designers. The idea of going, to my bosses and saying, "Hey, I want to be a designer," it's like, do they have those in video game? I mean, this was back in 16-bit, side-scrolling days. It was like, the artist will do it and the programmer will add some pickups. I mean, that was literally how 95% of the games got made. It's certainly console games. And so first it was fighting to explain we need designers in games. And not every game needs a director, but a game like this, where you are establishing a universe, if you don't have, whether it's a good vision or a bad vision, if you don't have a singular vision that everybody is funneling through, everybody's off making their own pieces. And if you're talking about building a brand new universe and you don't have a core idea that is sort of a singular vision, and ultimately the whole team, not the whole team, but key members of the team begin to add to that, you just end up with a big mishmash, and it usually is a game that gets canceled. So for this game, it was a position that I was proud that we kind of pushed and said, we need this as a position for this game.
Right. So let's talk about how God of War started. How did you even come up for the idea for this brand new universe, as you were saying?
Well, here, in the best possible way. That even sounds not good. But no, seriously. So I had always wanted to do a game that felt like you were going on this big adventure, and so that and my initial love of Greek mythology were sort of the initial ideas of, hey, let's make a God of War, or let's make a Greek video game, and then there was a sense of brutality and violence. Frankly, is something that a lot of gamers that sort of embrace this genre like, and we were kind of like, well, what if we kind of mix that with Greek mythology, which was very violent and very sexual and very adult, and if you read it. And so that's sort of where it all really began. Everybody already knows it's a team effort. Everybody knows that Jaffe didn't do God of War 1 by himself. But until Corey came on and brought the animation to Kratos, it was like I could show everybody videos of Russell Crowe and Romper Stomper till the cows come home. But until, and I did, I said, you see how he's slamming this guy's head into the bar? But until Corey came on and was able to actually take that and express it through animation, he was kind of a dead character. And, you know, Corey is as much as, if not more, the father of Kratos than I am.
Oh, Dave.
It's true.
He actually explained what the character was. Oh, sorry, but he said it was Martin Riggs and Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
That was the example you gave. First day on the job, he's like, hey, Greek mythology, he's Martin Riggs and he's Russell Crowe. Go.
I remember the one sheet that we turned into Sony that said sort of what if, it actually said what if Paul Verhoeven, which nobody knew, so I changed it to Ridley Scott, but what if Ridley Scott directed Clash of the Titans? And it was the idea of basically taking that kind of very adult sensibility and applying it to Greek mythology. And so there were a lot of stories that, I mean, we originally had Kratos mimicking the Perseus' mother story where he was put in a box and thrown into the ocean and covered with chains, and that's where his chains originally came from because it crashed on the rocks, and Ares was attacking the seaside village. And I mean, it was, and everything kind of technology and animation, and Charlie Wynn, who was the concept artist who really kind of gave birth to this character visually, everything fed into everything else. And my favorite story about that just really shows how incestuous it is that Charlie was doing, I went to him and I said, do a version of Kratos like Ed Norton from American History X when he was the Nazi. Right? Because he was just so, I mean, he's a Nazi, but in terms of his physique, that scene where he curb stomps that guy and he's like, ah, and it's like, holy he's, you know? And so he kind of did, it didn't look like Ed Norton, but it had that vibe. And the way Charlie draws, and I don't know if most artists do this, but I'd never encountered this, where he drew it, but the skin was all white. And it wasn't that it was white, it was like a primer or something. And I mistook that for, oh, you gave him white skin, that's awesome. He's like, no, I got to color him in. And I said, oh, no, don't do that. This is genius. And from that, I remember it was me and Charlie and one other guy, I forget who it was, standing there, and we said, well, we got to come up with a reason why he has this skin now. And that gave birth to the story of, hey, he kills his family and he gets cursed, and that's the ashes of his dead family. So everything on a game, because it's not like a movie where you have a screenplay and then you make it. You're making the game well before you know all the elements of the story. Everything kind of fed into each other until the very end, and it's like, oh, I guess we have a complete product. I'll be quiet now. You guys should say something.
Now, okay, so Kratos is this, you know, bloodthirsty character with no real moral compass beyond personal vengeance, really. Yet we all root for him. Why do you think that is?
I think it goes to the core of what you were talking about also. He's the alpha male, but at the same time, the whole Martin Riggs thing with Russell Crowe really rings true. It's just that it's the kind of guy that you don't want him to be all good or all bad. You want him to straddle the line. And that's the thing, like that's what makes him so great, is that he straddles that line between you don't really agree, but you're fine doing that because ultimately you know the end goal is right. And it's the making of every great hero in every story, I think. If you look at the history of humanity, if you look at the greatest stories out there, it's always about that guy who straddles the line.
He's also the underdog.
I was going to say the same thing.
And that's, I mean, everybody loves a good underdog story, and he's not he's not the one that you normally think of it, but for me, that was the biggest thing.
Well, he's an underdog, but he's like the ultimate underdog.
Right.
I mean, he's this human, you know, going up against gods and creatures of mythic proportions. So it's like it's the underdog times like 100.
It's the underdog that you believe could take down a titan.
But to me, like personally, like I relate to him, and it's not about the moral stuff. It's about like what Dave was talking about like really early, was that, you know, if you could do, if something frustrates you or you're angry about something, you need to you know, conquer something. If you can do it in a fashion that's just epic and over the top like Kratos can, you know, like who wouldn't be, you know, compelled to play a game about a character who like has these same challenges and faults and flaws as everybody else has, but when he wants to do something about it, it's, you know, ripping the heads off a Hydra or something like that. You know, like that's awesome. So.
And it's interesting about Kratos is that while he may be maybe not an anti-hero, but you know, fairly myopic in his view of having vengeance, he kind of inadvertently changes the world around him for the better in almost every situation. Sure, he may have a huge body count and a bunch of blood following him, but I mean, you know, he's bringing down a fairly corrupt system of gods. In the end, he actually gives mankind free will. So I think his actions, while, you know, from a different perspective on his own, desires actually help the world, which I don't know if everybody sees it that way, but.
With the success of the first God of War, what was the reasoning behind getting a different director for every installment? Did you just become too expensive?
I wish. Wow. I mean, I left Sony because, you know, for me, it was a sense of, I was looking at what these games were making, and I was just like, you know, and I was seeing friends selling companies and making a lot of money, and I don't know if I'll ever have the ability to do that, but it was me kind of going, you know what? I want to strike out and kind of try to make great games and make a crap ton of money. And that's just honest. I was just like, you know what, there's a lot of money in this industry. Maybe I'll never get any of it, but it would be kind of cool if I could. And so that was why I left, and you stepped in.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of the same. For me, I liked going into work with the people I liked going into work with. So seeing a lot of those people leave, and Eric Williams was a guy I'd worked with for like the last 15 years. He was the main combat guy on God of War 1 and God of War 2. He was striking out to be a consultant, and Shannon had left as well. Phil Harrison, and that was a really big blow to me. I'm just kidding about that. So I kind of realized, like, you know what? Staring down the barrel of a long 3-year crunch on that game, with not some of the people, excluding some of the people I really enjoyed working with, kind of, it didn't appeal to me anymore. And other opportunities, you know, getting to work with George Miller, I was pretty much not going to pass that up. So it wasn't any sort of indicator of like, hey, you know what, we got to have a different director. It was a good spin. It's a great spin to say, hey, we have a different director. That was the whole process from the beginning, is we wanted somebody different. But the reality is maybe our own egos got in the way. So we all wanted to move on and do bigger, better things, calling all cars.
Yeah, I mean, for me, passing. Nice job there. But as far as, you know, moving on, I think it's not so much that I didn't like doing what I did or anything like that, but we started the company, me and a couple of other friends, and at the time that God of War was finishing, I think the company as a whole needed me more than the game did, and I was juggling business with making a game, which is always a bad idea because you'd end up by arguing with yourself constantly, because creative ideas don't necessarily make good business ideas. And when I talked to Dan, it was mainly that. It was just, you know what, at least for the time being, I need my focus on strengthening the company. And I couldn't do both and be sane. But you know what, that said, we have 5 directors, 5 games. I think that's the reason why the games work that well.
I was just going to ask, why do you think having so many different directors is beneficial to the franchise?
We all have our different takes. We might not agree with everything that we would do, you know, in each of the games. But that was the beauty of it, right? It's like the franchise wouldn't be what it is if not for the fact that we all brought a little bit of ourselves into the game we're making.
So then let me ask you this. As the franchise has progressed, how have each of you changed the character of Kratos? How do you think his arc has grown over the games?
I'd actually say his arc it kind of goes all over the place, I think. You know, he has that consistent desire, I think, that was sort of instated in the first game of, I want to die. I did this horrible thing and I'll never forgive myself for it. And it sort of returns a little bit to that. But I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit to our detriment, perhaps. We haven't evolved his arc to change him as a person. I mean, he still kind of just shouts at the gods and says Ares and Athena a lot, which is great. He's an ornery character, but there are layers beneath that I think we could have explored. I know for myself, I feel like there was a lot of balls I dropped. That didn't sound right, did it?
No, it didn't.
I dropped the ball several times from a story perspective on that game, because I tried maybe to go a little bit wider. I wanted to really have Kratos' impact be felt throughout all of the world, throughout all of that Grecian world. So maybe a little bit too much of the overreaching aspect and not personalizing his story. That's, I think, is an exciting aspect about Ghost of Sparta, is that it really gets down to Kratos' heart, more of a personal story, rather than maybe the overreaching grand epic that I was trying to go for. You know,
I think that is really a really good point. Like when we started working on that story.
That I screwed up? That
no,
was a good point?
not that you're dropping
Thank
balls.
you for that.
You know,
I dropped balls.
yeah, keep those balls up.
Right.
But no.
Okay.
That, you know, when we first started talking about
I can't say anything worse than you've already said.
no, but that when we first started talking story on Ghost of Sparta, I mean, it's this huge story with this huge arc that, you know, one of the decisions made early on was to focus on a smaller aspect of it, right? It's like, we kind of know the big picture, but let's hone in on a part of his backstory that'll connect this game to the other ones, and let's really tell it in fairly great detail so that you can get, you know, you can get a lot out of it, and you kind of feel like, oh wow, we didn't just kind of gloss over that. That was kind of an important thing, and it really does tell me a little bit about why he's so and, you know, so I think that was actually a cool choice. Maybe you dropped some balls, but I think you picked them up.
Thank you.
We're going back to that?
Yeah,
David's
we're going back.
favorite
We're done with that,
subject?
though.
Right.
We get the reason behind the rage. So what did each of you learn from Kratos along his journey?
I can tell you exactly. I mean, God of War is about a guy who, God of War 1, is about a guy who puts everything aside for his ambition for work. And he loses his wife, and he loses his kid. And, you know, that's all I need to say about that, so.
I don't even want to follow up with anything now.
I don't mean to be sad. I mean,
You couldn't have waited till last to say
it's about putting your work ahead of your spirit. I mean, that's what that's what it was about for me.
So I guess killing people solves problems is not really going to go over so well.
No.
You're the one who went grander and bigger. It totally can be.
Right, yeah. No, I did learn something from Kratos, actually.
Tell me.
That what you want, you should just take it. It seems really basic and really simple, but quite honestly, Kratos gets everything he wants, save for the fact that he doesn't get those horrible memories of killing his family out of his head, which was a great little whoop, pull the football away. But I really do believe, like, there is a lot to be learned from that. Of, you know what, if you want something, be consequences. Be this sort of pessimistic thinking that you could talk yourself out of it, and just do it. Because if you don't do it, you won't do it.
Now
it's time for deep thoughts.
It's very true, though.
No,
Very,
it's
very true.
And Dana, we haven't seen your game yet, but
Yeah, well, soon enough.
yeah.
But no, I mean, I think from a character standpoint, I think super insightful what David just said about the whole idea of Kratos basically forsaking the things that really matter in his life for his job. It's like war, making these games. These games are really, really hard. So who you have in the trenches with you really matters. And, you know, it's a really strong group of individuals that work together as a team to make these games. But we're all sacrificing stuff. We're all making choices every day, you know, to make these games as epic as they are, so you guys will enjoy them. But there's a cost to all of them. So like,
remember, when you get your $5 off at GameStop for the used copy. I'm kidding.
The God of War series saw Kratos traversing worlds not often seen in video games. Let's take a look at his epic journey.
From the majesty of Athens to the depths of Hades, no ground was held sacred by Kratos.
With every city you destroy, the wrath of Olympus grows.
Beginning with a furious battle in the Aegean Sea, God of War takes the gamer on a journey across historical locales and mythological spaces, each with its own unique character and threats to the former Spartan captain.
There is safe passage through the deadly sands, but only those who hear and follow the siren's song will discover it.
Level design is a lot about coming up with the puzzles and the layout and the pacing of an area, and coming up with the themes and how they integrate with the story.
Amidst the diversity of environments, they all have one thing in common: a grand scale with larger-than-life set pieces waiting for Kratos to conquer.
So many levels in these games are these just massive, massive environments where Kratos is almost just this tiny little character running through it. Do you ever think there was any danger of diminishing your protagonist?
Not at all.
He kills that big thing.
Right. It gave you that sense of scale, you know, so that when you did zoom in and see the character very big on screen, you carried that visual memory with you, and you were like, oh my God, this thing is huge. Like in the first one, just that little shot of Kratos sidling outside and seeing Kronos below. You know, these images carry with you as the gamer, so you're remembering those later when you're not seeing it, but the implication is there. So those, I think, were a really
But these guys took it to the next
Yeah, I
level.
think a big part of it is the camera, what you're doing with the camera, and trying to zoom in as close to Kratos as possible. We would always try to make sure that we could get as close that we could see the edge of his blades on the screen, so that you could always see the enemies. That way that you can engage with the person that you're fighting with, and then we would try to pull out as far as we could in the next shot, and then push back in, all doing it in real time.
What's amazing about the stories and the games is the fact that, yeah, you might feel small, or you might feel small, visually to that, but the fact that you change the world. This game, you don't just live in this world. Kratos changes this world as the games go on. And being able to change something that's that big is one of the reasons why this game is so epic.
And it also makes him feel so much bigger. It's not just about the scene and the scale of the scene, but it's the distance of the journey. And he basically, in God of War 2, I think, does the best job of that of any of the games. I mean, he goes on this journey to the edge of the earth. And this one guy did this. He got on Pegasus and he flew across the ocean, and he goes under the world and he fights Atlas, and remembering that stuff when you're playing the game and kind of compiling all the stuff that you did in the last 10, 15 hours or whatever. It's like, holy shit, this guy is bigger than everything.
Again, it's not really just about the size of what you're fighting. It's the repercussions that it has. When you finish that certain portion of a game or level or boss, it's what happens after that. One of the cool things about God of War 2 is just purely walking across those horses, and when you have the feeling that you're just walking in the environment, it's one thing. But then when you drag everything, out in the sea, suddenly you realize it's not about the size, it's the repercussions of what you're going to do to that. That's the important part about making games. And that's why I agree with Dave. It's like finding a different way of actually doing it. It's not just about size. It's not just about...
Size doesn't matter?
Yeah, well, that came out also the wrong way.
I agree, the concept of the size and the spectacle is really good, but you make a valid point about the whole connection to spectacle. Just having spectacle for spectacle's sake is kind of retarded. It's just so that you can have something on the back of the box. But the idea of connecting spectacle meaningfully into the gameplay, into the player's experience, so that it doesn't just feel like, I built a big level because I can build a big level. Aren't I awesome? These games actually allow me to get inside of them and be part of that experience. So.
Was there any challenge in keeping the epicness of these environments, consistent through the games, but putting them on the PSP?
Absolutely. Oh my God. It's like everything that's in your head. The one thing that we did when we developed both Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta, we didn't think of them as PSP games. As a matter of fact, I think at the very beginning, when you first talked PSP games, the idea was to turn around. It should be like a 2D side scroller. It should be Kratos, swinging his blade, 2D side scroller, climbing, not really a God of War game. And we had to push and we had to go, you know what? No, we need to replicate everything about God of War on this platform. It's all good when you say that to somebody and you go like, we're gonna do it. And then you gotta deliver and everybody's looking at you like waiting for you to do that. And yes, in your head, in concept art, in just creating the worlds, it all works. As soon as you gotta get it in there, it's like, literally it's like shoving this big thing in this little hole and you're just going like, I can't do it. And every single time, I know.
Sorry.
I saw that.
Because you should have a button like Dr. Evil, and anybody who makes a reference, boop. And so, you know what? We'd be the only ones left so far. That's all I'm saying.
You're making up for it, Jaffe.
What's that?
I said you're making up for it.
Yeah,
No.
So much class.
All right, Olivia. All right.
Oh, snap.
I think there were a lot of things we didn't even consider early on that actually made a big difference. Was like God of War, until the time we'd done Chains of Olympus, already existed on like a 4:3 aspect ratio on a regular TV. So there was a lot of vertical real estate we didn't have on the PSP. I mean, it's a 16:9 display. And so having a character who has aerial combat, like he's constantly jumping off the screen, So we kind of picked a camera distance that felt fairly safe so you could see him, you could see the action. And we're like, okay, let's kind of leave that alone and see if we can get everything to work. And it does. And then we followed the playbook essentially of, these epic, big grand scale shots. We put them in there. And I think with all those things, they kind of work together and it still feels like God of War. And then when we went to make Ghost of Sparta, we're like, okay, let's try like to be even more cinematic about it. Let's keep the camera out and let's let him get kind of small. And playing off of these things that you were talking about in the character design, like he's got this ashen skin. He pops on screen. He's got these chains that glow and he's whipping around. They're way bigger than he's ever going to be. So if you show him really close up, even on the PSP, and he fills most of the screen, and then you pull out because a giant monster just came out of the ocean, and he gets really tiny, it's okay because so long as he's still readable and he lights, it's going to work and it's going to still feel epic. And I think even on the handheld, people are just going to be surprised that it still works.
Yeah, you just got to hope that your PSP doesn't blow up or something like that. Seriously.
All right, so Dana, let's talk a little bit about Ghost of Sparta, because we actually get to delve into the lost city of Atlantis in this, which is something we all know, and yet we know nothing about it. So what kind of research went into developing this?
I mean, we kind of looked into some of the ways that people had thought, Atlantis had sunk. We were like, where could it possibly be? We looked at locations. We actually looked at some of the work that had been done previously for God of War on Atlantis. Like, apparently Atlantis was a place that was slated to be in, what is it, one or two games? Two games now.
No, in God of War 2.
Just in God of War 2, okay, in God of War 2 even. And there was some fantastic concept art that was done for that game, and we're like, oh, they had already some ideas. So we looked into all that, we kind of factored that in, and then we started having a little bit of fun with it, as God of War seems to do with everything. We were like, well, if there's a city of Atlantis, what better way for it to disappear than having your main character be responsible for the end of it.
Nice. The strength of a protagonist is defined largely by the antagonist standing in his way, and with God of War, there was no shortage of gods, mortals, or monsters attempting to stop Kratos on his path of vengeance. So here's a look at the villains of God of War.
Ares, you will die for what you did that night.
If vengeance is the central theme of God of War, then those at the receiving end of Kratos' revenge must tremble at the mere reputation of the mighty Spartan. Yet the villains standing in the path of Kratos definitely hold their ground against him, as they themselves are extraordinary forces to reckon with. From legends such as Hercules to gods like Ares, each posed a formidable threat to the Spartans' path of vengeance, all leading to the ultimate villain himself, the king of the gods, Zeus.
They have so much history, and that history kind of unfolds in the horrible things that they do to each other.
I will tolerate your insolence no more!
Okay, so Dana, with the vast number of possible enemies within Greek mythology, how did you narrow down your choices and differentiate your enemies from the previous titles?
I'm gonna let everybody in on a little secret. I've seen this drawing that David did, and I don't know if he knows that anybody else has even seen this thing, of the cast of God of War monsters. It's like a napkin drawing.
It's like on the board.
Like it has a Gorgon on it, Cyclops, and that's it. That's all the characters you need. It's this bestiary of animals drawn on a napkin. No, I mean, there's a lot of good creatures out there. There's a lot of good characters in mythology. So it's that notion again of what do people expect out of mythology. So we obviously pick those A characters that maybe people have already seen already in the previous games, but we kind of put a new spin on them. We try to redesign them, not just because we want to be clever, but because we feel like if they don't offer something new each time you play these games, then you're just going to get bored of them. So we went back and we actually looked at our entire cast of characters that we used for Chains of Olympus. And I think even though we may have only brought over like 5 characters from the last game, we redid them all. And then obviously we added all new characters to the cast as well, which we're not going to divulge all of them. But everything is fresh. We try to look at it and go, how can we make this guy better?
All right, Stig, I want you to answer this question last. So the other 4 of you, why do you think Kratos kills himself?
That's a good question. I mean, to me, it's like at the end of 3, when Athena is demanding back her power, it's obviously like he's basically deciding that he's done being manipulated. Like what Corey was saying, it's like everybody's been just taking him on this ride and they're all lying to him and nobody's made his situation any better. And so I think he realizes at the end that if he can't save himself, that maybe he's just going to do a solid for humanity. So he's going to deny her that ability and by effect allowing mankind to basically, take it up for themselves. And so I think it's this cool kind of, I'll sacrifice myself for the greater good.
Well, I don't know. One of the things that I think rings true in the series and in all games is that at one point or the other, I think Kratos knows himself, even though Athena tells him and all that stuff, it almost seems like he knows that he'll never forgive himself. He won't. From the moment that that moment happens, with killing his family, killing his daughter, it's something he can never get back. He seeks it. He wants redemption. He wants forgiveness. Actually, he wants to forget more than he wants, forgiveness. And at one point or the other, I mean, we've explored it in our stories on a more personal level. He can't. It's just that he's doomed. He is, forever doomed. And I think, what you see actually in him killing himself is really the fact that he can't forgive himself. He'll never will.
Korea, David, do you have anything to add?
You go first.
Well, I mean, there's the smarmy answer. The smarmy answer is death in God of War is pretty cheap. He's already been dead a couple of times and crawled his way back out. So at this point, it's kind of like just taking a flight, somewhere. But from a story standpoint, I mean, God of War, the entire God of War story opens with him trying to kill himself. He clearly doesn't really care about dying, and once he's done what he came to do, which was get his revenge, maybe there's a sense of now I can finally go be with my wife and kid who are dead, and so maybe it was to be with them. I mean, I think the ending of 3, was intentionally ambiguous. I mean, correct? I mean, I can't say I entirely understood the intent behind it. I got on Facebook immediately. It was like Pappy, who is the lead designer on 3. I'm like, what is this? Not in the bad way, but like explain to me what I'm, So I mean, it was a good ambiguousness, but for me, I kind of took it like he wanted to be with his wife and kid. He did what he came to do. And if Athena ends up kind of not getting what she wants and mankind gets what they want or what they ultimately have in the process, great. But he's basically done.
I think Kratos is kind of an accidentally altruistic character. I don't think that he has ever an intent. He never has intent to be altruistic. He never has intent to help mankind. So it was a little bit of a struggle for me to see that he's doing something to help mankind, making a conscious decision. It feels very awkward for him as a character. As far as why he killed himself, honestly, you kind of said it. Death means nothing in this world. You crawl out of Hades, and there's a whole life that goes on after you die. So you kind of get caught in this little loop of like, okay, he killed himself, but then he's going to still have to live with the fact that he killed his wife and child, just in another location, and he won't really be able to do anything except
there's been a
crawl
therapy
out.
down there.
Yeah. So honestly, I was a little confused by that, but I think maybe it is, like David said, it's an intentionally ambiguous concept at the end. I would say he did it for ratings.
Isn't that true of anything in Hollywood?
Yeah.
All right, so Stig, give us our answer. Did he?
He did it for ratings.
He did it for ratings?
Yeah.
Good job.
Yes, I got it right.
You know what? Everybody was pretty much right. Corey's right. Kratos didn't do it for mankind. That was kind of a byproduct of him getting what he really wanted. And all he ever wanted was to die and be back with his family, hopefully. I mean, who knows where they are right now? But everything has changed, and maybe that's the only thing that he's got left. I mean, he's a pretty selfish guy, and I don't know if he really wants to be with his family for any good reasons other than to kind of say that he righted the wrong that he did to himself. So.
And to them.
Right, exactly. But I mean, I don't even know if it really mattered to him what happened to them as much as what he did to himself by killing them. He's a very selfish guy.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons, and again, I'll take 10% of the credit, but I'll give you 90% of the credit of the hug in God of War 1, which to me is one of the very few instances in video games, certainly mainstream video games, where I go, okay, you know what? You can mix emotion and gameplay together, where you actually see and get to play a hint that, okay, here's some depth to this guy. He when he hugs his wife and kid, and it's a play mechanic, I just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. To me, when you say he's selfish, he is, but I think moments like that, which are very few and far between, do show him as someone that underneath all of this, is a guy who loves his kid, a guy who loves his wife, and I thought that was
Ghost
great.
of Sparta has a lot of that.
I haven't seen it yet.
A lot of that. I swear.
Now, Ruse kind of touched on this already, but do you guys believe that Kratos has finally forgiven himself?
No.
No.
I don't think he ever could. I think that's the fire that burns inside of him, I think that's what drives him forward. And I honestly think if he went to Elysium and saw his family, I personally don't feel that he could face them.
Well, I think it's cool too that if he's such a vengeful character that it's even like an internal vengeance. Like he won't forgive anybody who's wronged him, including himself. So if he's gonna kill himself, that doesn't seem like someone who's forgiven themselves. You would probably be like, okay, I forgive what I've done. I'm gonna live with it, and I've come to terms with it.
Stig, was there ever a moment where you wanted to answer that question while directing the game?
Well, I think there's a whole gameplay sequence where we do that right before we go into the first-person kill with Zeus. I mean, you walk through his steps, and he finds his wife and daughter, and then he finds Athena, and he basically comes to terms to a certain extent with himself, but does it mean that he forgives himself ultimately? I think that's still in question. I mean, there's more things that we could do with it, and I don't really want to get into that right now because maybe potentially that's something we might see in the future.
That sounds like there's a sequel coming. That sounds like God of War 4 might be coming soon.
There it is, announced.
Key to his battle with Zeus is the Blade of Olympus, a massive sword that is somewhat of a reoccurring character itself. But that wasn't the only weapon Kratos had in his arsenal throughout this saga.
When we were designing the main character, it was how do you put a guy on a box cover that people are going to immediately know who he is? It was all about the weapon.
When attempting to topple the gods of Mount Olympus, sometimes brute strength and sheer will are simply not enough.
You have learned to use the blades of chaos well, but they alone will not carry you to the end of your task.
As such, Kratos encounters a plethora of unique weapons to use, some earned,
These are the blades of exile. They will help guide you on your journey to the flame.
while some taken. Either given by a god or taken from an enemy, each of Kratos' weapons leaves him more equipped on his journey of vengeance.
The game's designed around you having to beat the crap out of lots of guys. So when it's you and one other guy, man, he's done for.
All right, guys, what is the coolest weapon that Kratos has used?
Wow, that's tough.
The blades.
The blades of chaos, yeah.
I mean, that's definitely probably the right answer, obviously.
I like the bow. First, when I started playing God of War 2 with the bow in it, that felt just right because now you've got this extension, this like kind of projectile thing, and then we took it a little bit further in God of War 3. But I'd say for me, hands down, it's probably the bow, just because you can whip it out at any time. You can light guys on fire, like groups of guys, and it's.
There we go again.
There we go.
Beep!
See, I didn't even
But
know that time.
I think it allows a nice kind of wild card to be thrown into the battle, and yeah, it's sweet.
You know, there was a moment, I think, I had taken a trip over to Santa Monica, and you guys were not done with God of War 3 yet, but you were showing me like a little test level, and you guys had like the Blade of Olympus all decked out in there. And, I was like, oh my God, the Blade of Olympus is so like, obviously, I think the blades, first and foremost, are the best weapon in the game. But that thing, it's cool because, it looks like it belongs to somebody important. I think that was one of the things that I always thought was really clever about God of War, was that a weapon is a weapon, but at the same time, like, it should also be a character too. When I look at the Blade of Olympus and it has like all those people on it, and it's got that crazy big blood groove and it glows blue, I look at that thing and I go, that's just like, it inspires me to want to chop people up with it.
Okay.
In a good way.
He's a little disturbed.
There's like two categories for that too. There's the sort of iconic aspect of Kratos' blades. They're like the fedora and the whip for indie. They're very, like, Kratos is not Kratos without the blades. So I think the weapons are fantastic. As far as the gameplay usage, I actually really liked Army of Hades and Chronos Rage. I think those ones were awesome. The Fire and Forget, you could just rock a bunch of enemies with that. Those were just absolutely fun to use. But they're kind of, they blend in the background with the sort of large collection of magics and weapons that you use. So I think the blades sort of always win, hands down.
Well, I think the Medusa head was the very first image I ever had of God of War. The idea of a guy going around with this and sort of using it as a weapon. I still love that, and I love the move you guys did in 3, which was kind of like the Spartan flanks, kind of everybody kind of, huddling up, and then I love that move. So.
The shields.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, Dana, what new weapons can we expect in Ghosts of Sparta?
Wow, it's a good segue into that, I guess. I guess touching on kind of what you were asking just a second ago, one of the weapons that we've kind of already put out there that people have been, seeing, and you played with, I guess, at E3 probably as well, is the Arms of Sparta, which is a spear and shield combination. And that actually comes from just, classic, visuals that we see Spartan warriors, wielding. We took a different approach with the secondary weapon in Chains of Olympus, because we just wanted to do something different and actually really change up the play style. I think the same is true with this weapon, the spear and shield combination we have in Ghost of Sparta, because I think we realized it's not a good idea to try to outdo the blades. The blades are just awesome. Everybody loves them. They play great. You can do cool stuff with them. They're always going to be good. The thing to do is to maybe go, what else could Kratos use that's also useful, that doesn't compete with that maybe complements it or allows you to play in a different way? So we started looking at defense, and it's like this thing where it's like, it's not really fun maybe for the average gamer to play defensively, right? Like, I don't want to be sitting there, hunkering down, just blocking all day. I want to be out there mashing buttons and killing guys and just wrecking fools. So we took defense and turned it into kind of an offense. Like, so he's got this shield, and you can do offensive things with it. You can move while you're blocking. You can gain ground on guys. You can just bash the crap out of them. You can launch them in the air with it. So we took things that we know and we love that work on the blades, and we said, how can we use those mechanics and infuse them into this weapon with new moves and kind of take a different take on it. So I think people are going to find that while there's another layer of complexity to the Spear and Shield and Arms of Sparta, that they offer like the chance to kind of play a different way with Kratos that I think a lot of people will find there's a lot of depth to and a lot of reward in it.
Well, it also feels very Kratos-y to turn defense into offense. I mean, he's not a man who's going to stand there and block. He's a guy who's just going to
he's not going to wait for he's not going to wait for things to happen. He's going to make them happen, even if it is being kind of covered up.
Right. So among the many revolutionary elements introduced by the God of War series, perhaps the most compelling is the epic storyline that takes Kratos through the world of Greek mythology, all while establishing his own legend. Here's a quick look into the sprawling saga of God of War.
Is it Athens you have come to save?
No, I can't!
With its unique use of flashbacks and non-linear storytelling, God of War took gamers on a journey filled not only with adventure, but with powerful emotion.
My wife, my child. Oh.
The game is really to make you feel like you're in an adventure. It's an epic adventure. It's to really make you forget that it's just a game.
I was trying to make you a great warrior. You succeeded.
Not to be outdone, God of War 2 expanded on the legend even further, taking us through the massive world of ancient Greece and integrating Kratos' own quest with the stories of famous mythological characters.
Do you not know who I am? Have you not heard of Icarus?
So it's a sort of an interesting tying together of all these different elements and really bringing together the actual mythology of all of these gods being completely insecure because of the kind of cyclical nature of overthrowing each other.
And like many epics before it, deeper stories can be gathered from the main plotline, such as the tales for Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta. The two PSP games shed light and expand on a period of Kratos' life not seen in the trilogy.
Zeus! Your son has returned. I bring the destruction of Olympus!
And God of War 3 provides an epic conclusion to a legend that has woven itself to mythic proportions.
My vengeance ends now.
All of this wrapped up with an intricate theme of vengeance and redemption.
The power of forgiveness comes from within.
Okay, obviously when you talk about story, you always have to start at the beginning. So, David, the story in God of War was actually told mainly through flashback, which isn't very common for video games these days. So, why was that the motivation behind it?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in opening. See, I was going to say opening with a bang, but I am not going to get the button. So, but I'm a big believer in that. I mean, like if you look at Indiana Jones, if you look at James Bond, the idea of opening with a suicide, was really compelling. But then obviously the question becomes, well, who is this guy and why? And so we immediately need to travel back in time a little bit to learn that. So that was the initial reason that we said, okay, let's tell things out of order because we need to open. I don't want to open with a tutorial. I don't want to open with learning the character and learn. You just want to get in and play, And so that was that reason. But the other reason was, a lot of times when you play video games, it may take you a day or a week or a month or longer to finish it, just depending on the length of the game and what's going on in your life. And so you tend to forget a lot of the details. And so it was important that the core through line was very simple. It was Raiders of the Lost Ark in Greek mythology. Go get the box. The Ark was Pandora's box. And even if you had, spent 6 months away from God of War because another game came out or you got busy with other things, that was a pretty simple thing to kind of hang your brain on of, I know what this is about. So I didn't want to complicate that through line for that very reason. You know, and then the question was that if that's all you do, you end up with a story that is flat. There's nowhere to go with it. And so the idea behind the flashbacks were that we could still travel that very simple core story, but for people who wanted more, we had these flashbacks that allowed players to learn more and get more of his story. And if you played it all within a weekend or something where you could kind of actually take the whole thing in, ideally it would have been a satisfying experience, and clearly for a lot of people it was. But that's the reason we chose the flashbacks.
So, Stig, you had the honor of actually ending the story, ending the trilogy. But if the rest of you had your way, how would it have ended? I've read some interesting stories on Wikipedia, so I'm actually really interested.
Well, I mean, look, Corey and I can't speak to where his head is today, but we had a story mapped out that I desperately pleaded with Stig. I remember sitting on the floor of my house in San Diego, you. But we had that phone call. And, and again, as I've said, and I'll say it again here, I think God of War 3 is definitely one of the best games that's come out this year, and I thought it was just an absolute blast. So you guys, obviously you're always going to have your own way of what you would have done, and I abdicated that seat a long time ago, and so I have no issues at all. I thought they did a brilliant job, but we had worked out a different story and a different ending that I still think would have been cool. And I've talked about it in the press before, and so it's not like a secret or anything.
Can you elaborate a little here?
No, he's talked about it in the press before.
The high level was, and jump in on the stuff I've forgotten, but the high level was basically you kill Zeus in the first couple of minutes of God of War 3. There's a vacuum in there's a vacuum on Earth because the Greek mythology religion is in shambles. The other religions and gods rush in, Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology, to kind of take over that place now that Zeus is no longer a power. And it really becomes sort of a mashup of Greek and Egyptian and Norse mythology, where Kratos kind of gets to journey to all these other locations. And it kind of sounds like a toy, but you'd have like Egyptian Kratos and Norse Kratos, and he kills Thor and takes the hammer. And I always love the idea that the reason we have the Sphinx in Egypt is he has used the Medusa head to freeze this creature out in the desert, which ultimately ends up being what the Sphinx is. But ultimately, he ends up getting all the gods to fight amongst themselves, thus ignoring man on Earth. And the way Kratos realizes that you kill gods with finality is that you get people to stop believing in them. So as the gods have ignored man, man begins to turn away from the gods, and that's how Kratos kills all of the gods. And now with all of the gods dead, he uses the blades of chaos. We were going to use the 6-axis, and you were just slitting your wrist, and that's how he dies. And the last scene is like sawing a log. The last scene would have basically been two things. There was two epilogues. One was the controllable wise men going towards the North Star, indicating that even with all that Kratos has done, man always needs something to believe in, something to aspire to, and it was the beginning of the rise of the new gods that we have today, and a lot of people would say are also on their way out. And then there was a second epilogue.
Controversial.
There was a second epilogue where ultimately what happened to Kratos, and we had talked about, I know it's been attributed to different people, but the ultimate idea was that the Blades of Chaos were ultimately melted down to become the Grim Reaper's scythe, and Kratos becomes the Grim Reaper. And that was the ultimate way, correct, that we had planned on ending the whole God of War.
That was the way you planned on ending
it. Come on, it was in God of War 2
No, we had talks. What I was setting up in 2 was this idea that Athena had died and was the first person in the pantheon of gods to actually have a selfless act, to die from a selfless act. So she had kind of ascended to this higher level. And then at first she's somewhat altruistic and being like, hey, wow, okay, I did pretty good. But then she starts to realize, wait a minute, I can actually affect the rest of the world. I don't want anybody else to get up here. I want to, and this is where I was kind of moving towards the monotheism Passover, was the idea of the one true God. She wanted to become the one true God. So she uses Kratos as like this earthly vessel to enact her plan. Whether she admitted it in the third game or if it would continue on past that, it always kind of, for me, felt like everyone's betraying him, and she's the one coming with this cloak of friendship. And even throughout the entire game, she always maintains that friendship, that idea that, look, I sacrificed for you. I prevented you from killing Zeus, but I did it for a bigger reason. There was a greater cause to ensure that Olympus stayed strong. Otherwise, you wouldn't want what was going to come after that. And then she realizes what could come after that would be her in control, her in power. So instead of like Dogma, where Alanis Morissette is God, it would be like, you know, Athena would be God.
But what was great about that, though, was the weapons. It was like Kratos had the 10 Commandments, and he was like, "Thou shalt not kill." Awesome. Awesome.
That'd be awesome.
For Dana, any ideas? Or even Stig, did you have any other endings that you were toying with?
Well, there's another longer ending than what we did. I mean, there's another place that we could take it and that I really wanted to do. It's something that unfortunately I thought of it too late. Like it really came to me too late, and it was one of those deals that there's no way we could have gotten it done on time. But it kind of sets the groundwork of where I kind of see the game going potentially in the future.
God of War 4, people. God of War 4. While these 5 visionaries have differing views on the ultimate fate of Kratos, they can certainly agree on one thing. The God of War franchise has left an indelible mark not only on gaming history, but also among a whole culture of fans. Let's take a look at the lasting impact of this legendary franchise.
My lord, Kratos! Another city is ready to fall! Soon all shall know the glory of Sparta!
While God of War may have simply intended to become an action-adventure game, it has clearly struck the imaginations and psyches of millions of fans.
It was excellent. It was, you know, disgusting and exciting all at the same time.
Spawning a brand legacy that rivals the biggest names in pop culture.
I said I think this game needs to be a defining game for this generation, and I truly believe it will be.
It is no longer just a series of games. It is a phenomenon.
This is one of the best things I've ever seen.
This pretty much blew everything completely out of the water.
Setting the bar for games to come, it has spawned various merchandise tie-ins, demands for a feature film version, a best-selling CD, and a rabid fan base. So, as Kratos was seeking vengeance at the summit of Mount Olympus, the God of War franchise found glory at the top of gaming history.